Hello, and welcome to Perspectives on Philanthropy 2021, Nonprofit Leaders Reflecting on Giving USA. My name is Lindsay Marcinak, Managing Director at CCS Fundraising. We are delighted to partner with the Chronicle of Philanthropy for today's webinar. Our discussion will include a short presentation of the newly released Giving USA data, and then a robust conversation with our exceptional panel of nonprofit leaders who will share their insights from the data, including the impact that these trends will have on their own organizations. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. We encourage you to submit questions by typing into the Q&A box at the bottom of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will address as many of these as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of the session. Today's presentation is brought to you by CCS Fundraising. Just a quick note about us. We are a strategic consulting firm partnering with nonprofits of all sectors and sizes. We provide a wide range of services that support and strengthen nonprofit fundraising programs. And we apply insights from our work across the country, across the globe, and across more than 7 decades of collective experience. We operate in more than a dozen offices, coast to coast, here in the US and around the world. Our team is skilled in campaign and development strategies, and we believe in working in partnership with our clients at every step of the way. And I am so excited today to work in partnership with today's panelists who will join our discussion a bit later after our brief overview of the data. Steve Delgado, the Chief Operating Officer from Homeboy Industries, Connie Falcone, the President of the Northwestern Memorial Foundation at Northwestern Medicine, and Ruth McFarlane, the Vice President of Advancement at the Ms. Foundation for Women, will all be sharing their insights and perspectives. And again, my name is Lindsay Marcinak, Managing Director at CCS Fundraising. I operate out of our Chicago office and oversee our work with client partnerships across the central United States. My entire career has been devoted to the world of philanthropy, and I just love sharing strategic insights with development professionals like you to not only understand the overarching trends in the data, but also the practical application of these trends. So speaking of trends, as many of you on the call know, this is a very exciting time of the year for development and nonprofit professionals. Giving USA, the annual report on philanthropy, was just released on June 15th. Giving USA is the longest running, most comprehensive report on philanthropy in the US. The report is presented by 2 organizations, the Giving USA Foundation, which is a public service initiative of the Giving Institute, and the research team at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. We are so grateful for these organizations' hard work to share this important data each year, and CCS Fundraising is proud to be a member of the Giving Institute. Without further ado, let's dive into the data. Despite quite a tumultuous year in 2020, Giving USA estimates that charitable giving in the United States reached $471 billion in 2020. This is the highest level ever on record and a 5.1% increase from 2019. When adjusted for inflation, it is 3.8% increase from 2019. On average, philanthropy gave a combined $1.29 billion per day in 2020. Of course, there has never been a time like this in the United States history, and the circumstances of 2020 really created a unique environment for philanthropy. Certainly central among this was the COVID-19 pandemic, which really led to different cascading effects on the economy. The racial and social justice movements generated a surge in giving and advocacy to organizations working with racial equity and advancing social justice. The stock market, particularly the S&P 500, grew 16.3% in 2020, which was the best year in recent years. But at the same time, gross domestic product decreased by 3.5%, and the overall unemployment rate increased by 3.2%. So certainly a variety of factors. Efforts by the federal government to offer relief, notably the CARES Act, helped many households, individuals, and organizations weather the storm of the pandemic. It's important to understand the sources of philanthropic support during this incredible year. Individual giving continues to be the largest source of charitable contributions in the United States. This is 69% of total giving. This number, however, doesn't necessarily give us the full and complete picture of the impact of giving from individuals. We also account for giving by bequests as gifts from individuals, as well as a share of giving from the foundation's slice of the pie, which often comes from family foundations and is driven by individual decision makers. Interestingly, gifts from donor-advised funds are counted in a number of different ways. It's quite a complex way of looking at the data, but just notably, giving from individuals to donor-advised funds are counted within the individuals section of this philanthropy. Exceptions would be if gifts are granted from one's donor-advised fund, say a fund that's held at a community foundation, that would be counted within the foundation's slice of the pie. We'll revisit this in just a moment when we review gifts from different sectors. Notably, foundation giving, which includes grants made by independent foundations, operating foundations, and community foundations, has been growing remarkably for decades. In 1980, foundations made up just 6% of all giving, and now it's 19%. Also, corporate giving comprised 4% of all charitable giving in 2020. This includes cash and in-kind gifts that are made from corporate giving programs, as well as gifts and grants made by corporate foundations. On the next slide, we show some interesting trends, the year-over-year changes by funding source. There was an increase in individual bequest and foundation giving. Growth in giving by foundations and individuals is often linked to stock market performance. And thus what we saw was a very strong stock market at the end of 2020 did influence overall giving trends. But we also saw a decrease in corporate giving, which might be surprising. The economic impact of the pandemic certainly affected industries in an uneven manner. Giving by corporations overall, though, declined in 2020 because of several economic factors, mainly because corporate pre-tax profits declined by 3.5%, and gross domestic product, which we define as the value of all goods and services made within a country, declined 2.3%. Though this might be surprising because we heard of a lot of very generous gifts from corporations in 2020. And certainly there were very many generous gifts. But some of these gifts were actually not considered corporate philanthropy. Rather, they were categorized as impact investments. Also, it's important to note that this is giving that we know does not always account for multiple year pledges, meaning that some of the overall pledge that a corporation or other organization made not be counted in full in any one year. The other side of this story is to look at where philanthropic dollars went. So let's next look at total giving by sector. Giving grew in 8 out of the 10 recipient types as defined and tracked by Giving USA. Religion received the largest amount of gifts, which is traditional with longstanding trends. Following this was education, and then human services. And despite being categories with a lower share of charitable dollars overall, the fastest growing sectors were giving to individuals and giving to environment and animals. It's also important to understand the year-over-year changes to different giving sectors. Human services environmental and animal organizations, and public society benefit experienced the most growth in gifts in 2020. Growth from the support to human services continues a historical pattern that we often see, that when the United States experiences a crisis or some type of economic downturn, giving to human services increases as the need for programs to address basic human needs also increase. Interestingly, giving to public society benefit includes gifts made to national donor advised funds like Fidelity Charitable and Schwab Charitable, along with gifts to organizations like United Ways and Jewish Federations. Also, we recognize that gifts to arts, culture, and humanities organizations decreased in 2020. We often see gifts to arts and culture taking some type of dip during times of an economic downturn. And of course, in 2020, it was a uniquely challenging year for arts organizations because of the shutdowns that impacted in-person events, visits to museums, and live performances. But fortunately for the arts sector, we do see historically that giving to arts and culture does rebound after these kinds of dips in giving. And you may be surprised to see that giving to health also decreased in 2020, particularly since our healthcare systems played such a pivotal role in 2020. Cumulatively, though, if we look at giving to health from 2018 to 2020, expanding a 2-year view rather than just a 1-year view, we see that current dollar giving to health institutions actually increased by 3.1%, again, between 2018 and 2020. When we adjust that for inflation, giving remained flat. So there's a slightly more nuanced story to tell in terms of gifts to the healthcare sector. And certainly, as we think about 2020, the philanthropic response to the COVID-19 pandemic was truly monumental. On the next slide, we showcase the unprecedented scale of COVID-19's global impact. As of June 2021, Candid recorded more than $23.9 billion in pledged and granted support for COVID relief worldwide. Of that, 21.7 billion has been designated for organizations based in the United States. And certainly in 2020 and into 2021, donors also utilized philanthropy as an important tool to advocate for long overdue changes in society amid a pandemic that exacerbated existing social inequities, and also in response to the widespread movement for racial justice. The $14.8 billion given to support racial and social justice represents 3.8 times the amount of support given to these areas over the last 9 years combined. Philanthropy alone cannot solve for the layers of systemic social inequity in the United States, and yet this influx of philanthropic generosity has been and will be an important lever in driving systemic change moving ahead. Also inside of 2020, particularly because of the nature of the COVID pandemic, we saw an accelerated growth rate of digital giving. And this chart shows that online giving has been rising steadily for years. But a study by Blackbaud tracked charitable-based giving, and in 2020 saw that online giving constituted 13% of all charitable gifts in the United States. Interestingly, that mirrors online retail sales trends as well. This increase is a 21% increase between 2019 and 2020. And when we look at the share of gifts that came from online giving, furthermore, 30% of all online gifts were made from a mobile device. Interestingly, online giving is growing in the fastest ways for the human services sector, the animal welfare sector, and within faith-based organizations. And so as we look at these trends, one last trend to really explore today is the giving from individuals and the ways that individual giving is changing. Giving USA estimates the amount of gifts that come from each source, but not the number of donors. When we look at a number of other studies, the amount of money given by individuals is growing each year, and the number of individual donors is decreasing. 53% of the general population gives. When we look at affluent households or high net worth households, which we often define as having $1 million of liquid assets exclusive of real estate, 90% of affluent or high net worth households give. And what we see here is that charitable giving is becoming increasingly concentrated among wealthier households. We see here that 20% of households account for 80% of charitable giving. When we isolate just the top 1% of households, those households account for nearly half, 45% to be exact, of charitable giving. Interestingly, preliminary studies from the 2021 Bank of America study on philanthropy in partnership with the Lilly School shows that these affluent American households did respond in big ways to the challenges of 2020. And notably, these households often concentrated their giving locally where they lived, whether that was giving to nonprofits or giving to individuals or businesses locally. So it's certainly a trend to keep in mind as we look ahead. So these numbers and these trends are really fascinating. They tell a really nuanced and complex story of the philanthropic landscape. But there is, of course, more to the landscape than just the data. And so I would love to invite our panelists to join the conversation about what these numbers mean for them, their mission, and their organization. So I would love to introduce you to Steve Delgado, Chief Operating Officer of Homeboy Industries. Steve is the Chief Operating Officer overseeing development, marketing and communications, media relations, and the global Homeboy network. Homeboy Industries provides hope, training, and support to formerly gang-involved and previously incarcerated people, allowing them to redirect their lives and become contributing members of the society. Homeboy Industries is internationally recognized for its gang prevention, rehabilitation, and reentry services. I'd also like to welcome Connie Falcone, the president of Northwestern Memorial Foundation at Northwestern Medicine. Northwestern Memorial Foundation raises funds to advance the patient-centered mission of Northwestern Medicine in order to provide the highest quality healthcare in the community, regardless of a patient's ability to pay. Northwestern Medicine operates an 11-hospital system. Connie joined the foundation in 2017 and leads a strong team of development professionals that consistently deliver high-performing results. And last but certainly not least, would love to welcome Ruth McFarlane, the Vice President of Advancement for the Ms. Foundation for Women. The mission of the Ms. Foundation for Women is to build women's collective power in the US to advance equity and justice for all. The foundation invests in and strengthens the capacity of women-led movements to advance meaningful social, cultural, and economic change in the lives of women. Thank you all for being here today. We are so excited to hear your perspectives and experiences over the last year. And Connie, let's start with you. As a leader in the healthcare sector, can you speak to how you are looking ahead with resolve and with optimism after seeing the decline in philanthropic giving last year in your sector?
Yes, Lindsay, you pointed out, you alluded to this in your opening remarks on the healthcare sector generally. It's a little bit of a head scratcher in a year that saw great need for healthcare organizations to rise to the occasion of the pandemic. But I think what we all felt in this sector is a great need to be connecting with our donors in a very different way, and to really to share with them information about the pandemic and how they might take good care of themselves and answer questions, et cetera. So we moved from really fundraising to engagement and informing. But I think now, as we look to this fiscal year and look ahead, what we really experienced is a great pause. It was a pause in asking for gifts. And so we're now beginning again to connect with donors in a way that has eliminated our need to educate them about the benefits of healthcare, right? It is now one of the things in the nonprofit sector, I think all of us can attest to, is sometimes there's a little bit of an educational component before we can make an ask. But the need to have exceptionally strong healthcare for you and your family and your communities has never been more easy to understand and appreciate. So I think that's a great barrier that we've eliminated. But I think more importantly, I think what this last year has demonstrated for us and for our donors is the need to really spotlight disparities in care and health equity. And so we're excited that our donors now understand and appreciate the need to provide some philanthropic support to accelerate the work that many of us are currently already doing in the communities to, really eliminate those disparities of care. So I think it's very energizing to us to have donors that want to participate in that conversation now. So we're really looking forward to the future with great optimism.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Connie. And Steve, certainly those that you serve at Homeboy Industries represent a diversity of intersecting backgrounds. And you have a long track record in working in social justice. So as you look ahead, how are you thinking about maintaining the momentum of funding that has happened for social justice and racial equity? But also, how does that affect your own messages in building from Connie's idea of equity?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. And it's an honor to be here with everyone today. I hope I can share one or two things that might be helpful this morning. Certainly, as the Giving USA data suggests, human service organizations and those with missions in pursuit of racial equity and social justice have seen upticks in philanthropy. And consequently, Homeboy Industries was fortunate to have an exceptional fundraising year in 2020, and that momentum is continuing into 2021. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to say that the people we serve experienced more than an exceptional year in surviving the pandemic, and too many did not. So we are thankful for the support we receive and also very cognizant of the human suffering that has accompanied this uptick in fundraising. That being said, as we look forward, we understand the important role that our organization has played in serving those on the margins and being a leading voice for social justice issues for nearly 35 years, as you've said, Lindsay, just like many of the organizations on this call today. And frankly, we believe the time is now to act and to continue to push for a new paradigm forward in the way the world should stand with vulnerable communities. So we're absolutely connecting our case for support to a new way forward that is anchored in a few tenets: the transfer of power to deserving communities, developing leaders from diverse backgrounds, including those with lived experience, and expanding services into new spaces for us, including housing, which was an issue of importance pre-pandemic and continues to be front and center, right? So, now we really think is the time for us to be more vocal and claim a leadership point of view in the spaces we operate, which translates into fundraising. So really seizing the moment, if you will, to be more vocal about our aspirations in the spaces that we know folks are paying attention to.
Thank you, Steve. And your notes about the focus of your messaging, your need, and your case for support also align with trends that we've been monitoring with organizations across all sectors. In that we completed a recent survey of more than 1,000 nonprofit institutions who shared with us that 37% of those organizations are messaging their case for support in some capacity to better highlight the work they're doing within social justice and racial equity. But nearly half have taken steps to make the board more inclusive and more diverse. And so, Ruth, as part of an organization, as a leader of an organization that has always had a focus on advancing equity and injustice for all, what best practices can you share, particularly with organizations who may just be starting to pivot to a more equitable workplace and a more inclusive focus of philanthropy?
Thanks, Lindsay. It's a great question. I'm happy to be with you all today. And Steve, want to almost echo a lot of what you were saying around equity as a starting point for answering this question. Ms. has been working at the intersections that fall under the umbrella of feminism for decades now. And one of the things that we have learned from our work and from our research is that there are basically two things you really have to think about first. The first one at the very top is representation. When you're thinking about equity, you have to look really carefully at how groups of people, how individuals are represented across your workplace, whether that's within the workplace, departments, tiers, functions, how are people getting to have a voice in how their workplace and work life will be shaped, but also how is your organization being led at the highest level? In June of this past year, Ms. published a research publication called Pocket Change, How Women and Girls of Color Are Doing More with Less. And it covers a whole panoply of subjects, obviously points, really shines a light really specifically on huge discrepancies in funding to women and girl of color led organization, but it also looks at how these organizations continue to have really impactful change and the incredible strategies they use. But one of the things that we really highlight in that document is how to understand leadership and how to define whether an organization is actually led by women and girls of color. And it's a really good learning for this conversation. So we look at is there 75% or higher women and girls of color involved in making the financial decisions of the organization. And that very quickly allows you to take a closer look at the structure of the organization. Is the board actually making those decisions? Who's on the board, et cetera? And so it's if you can sort of set yourself a benchmark that allows you to then open up the subject and really look at what's happening within your organization and across your leadership. And then the other thing I'll just quickly say is flexibility. Specifically, obviously, in the lives of women, one of the things we saw in the last year was just as we all kind of did everything inside of our houses, what was quickly made obvious was that there are a lot of systems missing to help to support workers in the workplace and help them specifically juggle their lives. And so the more that we can be flexible around schedules as we move now from remote to hybrid and other types of workplaces, how do we leverage the digital tools that we've all learned to use? Here we are doing it right now. How do we leverage all of these tools? How do we leverage technology? And how do we make sure that everyone in our workplace, from the board down to every single person on staff, gets to have a voice in what will really work best for them as we're coming back now into kind of a new chapter of the workplace.
And speaking of flexibility and new ways of doing things, we certainly saw a shift to the ways that we engage donors, in the ways that we were seeking and securing gifts from donors. And so, Steve, I'd be interested to hear from you what your key themes and takeaways are from a year of giving in a virtual setting, as well as a rise in overall online communications and giving tools, inclusive of social media and other grassroots programs. And as you think about this time of digital and virtual engagement, are you planning to continue any of these virtual solicitation strategies, or are you thinking about this in a new way?
Yeah, thank you. So certainly we experienced a rise in online giving, much like Giving USA sites And a lot of that obviously is due to what happened in the world, but also quick response from our organization in terms of really embracing digital platforms in a new kind of way, right? Much of our focus during the pandemic, and this will continue, as we emerge from this time, are the many talks, frankly, that our founder and other key program staff deliver throughout the year. In fact, during the pandemic, I'd estimate that we engaged nearly 150 organizations around the world to share our theory of change and pursuit of a new paradigm forward, right? And many of those that we engaged were some of the world's largest corporations with global talks to their workforces who were looking for inspiration and looking for messaging that could help them feel like they could mobilize and go to the margins with those in need, right? And those talks, obviously were part of great philanthropic outcomes for us throughout the year. So, and then, we conducted 4 major fundraisers, probably much like the experience of the group who's here today. So we'll absolutely continue to be nimble in that way. And I think over the past 18 months, we all learned that flexibility and pivoting really is the only way forward. And I think it's super important that we continue to think in that way, because ultimately it's about the same thing that it's always been, right? Which is meeting donors where they are and strengthening relationships, whether it be on Zoom, at a virtual gala or virtual 5K, or believe it or not, in person, right? During the pandemic, we actually called every donor we have who has given $1,000 or more to us during the last 5 years to thank them for their support and to let them know that we were in this together. So of course, virtual and digital outreach are going to continue to grow in impact, but we really have to be ready to engage in new ways, old-fashioned ways, and encourage our organizations to be nimble, right? Organizations that can function in all environments and platforms. So internally, we're talking a lot, continue to talk a lot about the right media mix, if you will, to best advance our mission and being a nimble organization in that way.
And in the spirit of flexibility and virtual engagement, Ruth, I know you've been really active in the virtual space this last year. And interestingly, your virtual events have included a lot of support from corporate philanthropy. And of course, we saw the trend that there's actually a decrease nationally in giving from corporations. You experienced something a little different and actually saw an increase in giving from your corporate partnerships. So I'd love to hear how that went over the last year and how you're thinking about continuing and deepening those relationships ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a really interesting year. I think everything that we've been talking about these new technologies absolutely came to bear here, and everything that we've been talking about around people kind of, especially in the corporate space, awakening to a new sense of responsibility, accountability, even interest at the employee level in really engaging through their work in the social change happening in the world. Corporations have really had to respond to that and shift around that. And so we've been having really different conversations with our corporate partners this year. It's been an opportunity to revisit that ever-present fundraising question of, hey, is this the year where we come out of your marketing budget and we move into your philanthropic portfolio, right? Is this the right time for you to do a little more than sponsor our event, as much as we love having you there? So the opportunity was available to have those conversations, and we were fortunate to be able to move forward a couple of those conversations with some of our longstanding corporate partners who are now making grants on the programmatic side. So that was super exciting. And then, as Steve was saying, with the virtual, when you do a virtual event, when you're producing digital content, you now have an opportunity to bring players and new people into producing that with you. And so especially in the production of our gala fundraiser, instead of just kind of scrolling the names and saying the thank yous the way one might in the room, we offered everyone an opportunity to actually create some content themselves that we could then insert into the show. And what that, for some, everybody kind of did what they wanted with that opportunity, but in many cases, it really offered a way for our corporate partners to demonstrate the way in which they were shoulder to shoulder with us, demonstrate the way in which they too were lifting up a similar message. It wasn't just money to support the work of the Ms. Foundation, but actually this corporation saying, we too stand behind these values. And that's been really, really exciting. I think, again, old fashioned and new at the same time in a new way is what this is all about.
And Ruth, if I'm not mistaken, much like the trend that Steve saw in their virtual events, you had quite an expansive audience through that platform.
Yeah, we did. We had over 500. We did so in May of 2020. We were one of the first women's organizations to flip and do a virtual gala, and made the happy mistake of filming that whole thing live rather than in advance, rather than kind of having it happen on screen, which meant learning how to do how to become a production company in no time. But yeah, that allowed us to access a brand new audience. We've had over 1,000 people at each of our galas, actually substantially more than that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new people in our email lists as a result, hundreds of new donors. And it encouraged us to do a series of really content-rich programs during the year. So we now have a speaker series essentially that we're doing in partnership with other organizations where we think the overlap of our audiences could really be interesting. And that's been another way to really get the brand recognition of the organization out there, but also the work that we're trying to do and elevating, something that's really important at the Ms. Foundation is lifting up the voices and the work and the expertise of our grantee partners. And this has actually been a really exciting way to be able to do that, because we can literally have them as speakers, engaging with, some other nationally recognized name that brings a big audience, but now people are really learning about what's happening at the grassroots level in a way they never would have had visibility before.
That's really terrific. And we think about all the different opportunities for engaging donors, inclusive of the virtual space. We think about all of the conversation and attention that's been given to emerging and growing sources of support. And in 2020, we saw a lot of conversation around donor advised funds. And we also saw a lot of conversation around planned giving. Of course, bequests being one of the most popular forms of planned giving, but overall, the many different ways for estate and planned giving to occur. And Connie, I'm curious what your strategy has been in exploring and deepening opportunities within those giving sources.
Yes, well, certainly not as sexy as sort of the digital space, but I do think that planned giving is going to become increasingly important to all of us as nonprofit organizations, and worthy of investing a little bit of time and understanding in this somewhat unique area of giving. We're about to see the greatest transfer of generational wealth that we've ever seen in this country, and I think it's important for nonprofits to engage in this conversation. I recognize that oftentimes it's not easy to say, hey, donor, let's talk about debt. And so what we're doing is really reframing the conversation around legacy, because truly, when you think about the bequests in particular, you are paying it forward. You won't be able to see the benefit of your giving. And so really having conversations about the legacy that our donors are looking to leave, especially in healthcare or in any of our nonprofits. So we have actually embarked on a 3-year planned giving strategy and recognize that there's a little bit that's outside of our domain. And so one of the other recommendations I have for folks is to think about those that are in this space that can, if nimble is our keyword today, that can nimbly adapt to, for example, tax law changes that might benefit a planned giving donor, having somebody help you with that messaging for your donor base. But I'm really, really glad that you brought up the donor advised fund piece, because this is a personal, I guess, issue or conundrum for me, because I think there is so much wealth sitting in donor advised funds right now that could be deployed for organizations like ours to have immediate impact. So, there is sort of a steady drumbeat, growing drumbeat around deploying those dollars for nonprofits now. But my evil plan is to try to get those dollars before they get plopped into a donor advised fund. And so some of the things we think about are reading the news, paying really careful attention to your donor base and any type of liquidity event they may have just had, and getting to them before those dollars get placed into a donor advised fund. But I also think that all of us as leaders of our nonprofit institutions should understand when dollars are coming from donor advised funds and think about maybe an urgent time-bound request you might have for your nonprofit, and go right to those donor advised fund donors and say, hey, I know you have dollars there. Please deploy some for our use right now. But I do think it's an area that we should pay close attention to. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it a little bit.
Absolutely. And many may be familiar with the Half My DAF movement, which is a challenge and a call to action for those with donor advised funds to commit to granting half of the money in one's donor advised fund by a time-bound date. And then there have been opportunities to unlock matching grants through that. And in 2020, there were up to $8.6 million distributed from donor advised funds in just 5 months. And so that challenge continues for 2021. And so it is really a focused and interesting conversation that is underway now, not only to understand how to steward and retain donors that give through donor advised funds, but also, as you said, Connie, to really secure those gifts before a donor gives their assets to a donor advised fund. And so, thinking about funding sources, an emerging funding source is, the idea of digital currency. And it's somewhat of an exciting challenge to stay up to date on digital trends. Ruth, I know you and the Ms. Foundation for Women have really taken on some forward-thinking work and strategies around different digital currencies. Would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, sure, Lindsay. I'm happy to chat a bit about that. I also wanted to just say, with respect to what Connie was saying, how interesting it is how all of these things really weave together. I think plain giving is anything but not sexy, frankly. It is one of the ways that we can structure what we're able to do with our treasure at any scale, right? It's also really relevant to the initiatives that we're all trying to put in place now to bring in younger donors, right? It weaves together in many, many ways. When I think about why I'm excited about bringing all these new audiences through these accessible digital programs, a big reason is actually planned giving. There's a lot there for me strategically. But as to cryptocurrency, yes, we did have a really robust conversation with our board this year about what we wanted to do about gifts. We did have a large gift offered to the organization in the form of cryptocurrency, and then I engaged that donor in a conversation about how we can make that work. As I did that, what we decided with the board was that we would revise. We were in the process of revising our gift acceptance policy anyway, and we wanted to be explicit about crypto there. The challenges with respect to crypto, one, obviously it's a highly volatile form of currency, right? It changes value very, very, very rapidly. And there's also quite a lot of complexity around storing it and transferring it and converting it to US dollars. And so in light of all of that, we decided as a board that what we would do is, for right now, it's explicit in our gift acceptance policy that the process of transfer and conversion and everything needs to happen with the donor, so that really it's a cash gift to the foundation. That, of course, is less attractive to many donors from a tax perspective. And then we go back to the drawing board of the planned gift, right? The structured gift with respect to that. But yeah, it's been a really interesting opportunity to kind of educate ourselves and our board around these new technologies. And we'll just wait and see. I think we're going to see some more regulation in this space from the SEC. Right now, it's not really a regulated space at all. Another reason that I'm not quite comfortable kind of playing there yet, but I think we will soon start to see some regulation around that, and there'll be more security around transfer and holding of these sorts of things, and that'll give us more flexibility on the philanthropic side as well.
Talk about being nimble. You are ready for any evolving changes in this space for sure. You know, as each of you have been sharing about your own experiences, you know, there's one theme, a common thread through all of these different giving sources and experiences, which is this concept of donor stewardship. And we know that stewarding donors and retaining donors is central in the minds of so many, whether you're part of an organization that's experienced a decline in giving and you're looking to retain that loyal donor base, or if you're part of an organization that's seen just an incredible spike in giving, donor retention, donor stewardship, and communication is so central, regardless of giving source. And so, Connie, I'd love to hear from you in terms of how you're thinking about the momentum of donor stewardship, retaining your donors, and thinking about all of that inside of really communicating impact.
Yeah, I think, Lindsay, I always like to say if I have $1 to spend, historically, we would have spent 80 cents on trying to bring the donor in the door and 20% on, or 20 cents on stewardship, because we have this natural tendency to want to drive fundraising for obvious reasons, for programmatic needs and maybe goals that we're held accountable for. But the reality is, that's like buying growth stock versus value stock, right? We need to really flip the model and think more about spending 80 cents of our dollar on stewardship and keeping the donors that we have, because data shows it's far less expensive to retain a donor than to acquire one. But the reality is, we really need to show our donors the impact that their gift is having. It brings the donor joy to make that gift, and it brings them joy again to know that their gift has made an impact on your organization. And so I think just as much as you can invest people in technology, in stewardship, and getting creative as to how you might talk about impact, really elevating the stewardship pieces you're sharing with your donors to show that they're worthy of this elevated piece. All of these are things that we're thinking about in terms of donor retention.
Thanks, Connie. Certainly a very comprehensive set of best practices, and one that, regardless of a pandemic, we would always be thinking about as we look ahead to our fundraising strategies. As we think about donor retention, one really interesting and new trend emerging are the concept of major gifts and mega philanthropy. And Ruth, the Ms. Foundation for Women, received funding both from Jack Dorsey and Mackenzie Scott in 2020. Congratulations. And would love to hear the lessons you learned from receiving these mega gifts, and if and how you think about that as it relates to stewardship and retention.
Great, yeah, I mean, these gifts definitely present a very different scenario for stewardship than sort of what Connie was describing and what we're used to. But I also think they are part of the trend, Lindsay, you were describing in the data, where we see so many more individuals in the past year getting just galvanized about what's happening in this country, whether it was the pandemic or all of the, call for social change that we saw across our society. I think individual people are really ready. And I say all the time, I think of fundraising as activism. It is directly connected to the work. It is work of passion. And when individuals have an opportunity to engage the work through their talent, time, and treasure, and can understand themselves as an activist, I think the passion then that you really get, you activate, can do this, what we've seen this year with this phenomenon around the mega gift. And so getting to that then, no prior relationship with these donors. We did not know Mackenzie Scott. We did not know Jack Dorsey. And when the opportunity came to engage with their teams and think about what might be possible, that was not an opportunity to really build personal relationship. Instead, what we found was we had to be very, very responsive. We had to be ready with a tremendous amount of data and clarity around the strategy for the gift. It was important to leverage the full team. And we learned that, I wouldn't say we got it perfect the first time. We kind of, because we had two different opportunities, we learned how to do that a little better. And we're still learning. You really have to be able to, leverage the folks thinking about the programmatic strategy, leverage the people on your team who are thinking about the finance strategy for the organization. And then of course your fundraising and communications team have to be very, very quickly responsive to the particular questions of the individual. Storytelling, again, old fashioned with the new, the storytelling remains critical, but you have to pull that together quickly. When we were speaking with Mackenzie Scott's team, and of course we did not know it was her team. A lot of times also with these gifts, you're introduced to folks and you're speaking to somebody representing a major donor, but you don't know who they are. We were able to, at that point in the year, we had already raised a substantial amount of money and had exceeded many of our fundraising goals. So there was this additional piece of, okay, we know we're going to hand over a lot of financial data that's going to make that fairly clear. How do we craft a strong need case? And what we did was work closely with the finance team and with really leadership from the finance team to tell a story about what MIS would need over the next 3 years to take care of our capacity needs and our infrastructure needs, facing what we knew it was going to be a time of great growth for us, so that we could turn all our muscle to the field, so that the dollars coming in the door and all the resources and everything that we're doing really benefits a grassroots ecosystem. So, and that worked. That was actually well received. So it's really about thinking about these donors as very passionate human beings and extremely savvy investors. And you really have to speak to them in both ways at the same time.
Lindsay, can I just add to that for 1 second? It's all brilliant stuff, and we've been fortunate to receive a few transformative gifts over the past 18 months at Homeboy, and it's interesting that you started that question sort of with the stewardship piece, because in many respects, our first steps when we receive a gift like that is sort of catching our breath, right, and pinching ourselves to make sure we're not dreaming. But quickly thereafter, what we're really focused on is the messaging of what a gift like that means, especially to donors, right? Our generous donor community that has made and will continue to make a big difference for us, because as we all know, gifts like these are really a testament to the thousands of people and donors who have championed missions, over long periods of time. So at Homeboy, we've thought it's really crucial and important to not only embrace those gifts, but also to significantly voice our appreciation to the many supporters who really share in that gift, right? It's a testament to really the entire community. And when it comes to transformative giving, every organization is different, right? And whether a transformative gift is $1 million or 10 million or 100 million, right? It's all shapes and sizes. But I think we all know that transformative philanthropy really requires transformative ideas, right? So preparing, quote unquote, preparing for transformative gifts, I think, means putting in the time amidst all of the daily demands that we are confronting to continue to work on our case for support, to connect the dots substantially with marketing and communication strategies, so that the power of our transformative ideas and impact is constantly conveyed. And it goes back a little bit to what I said earlier. We sort of need to seize this moment in time to be bold in our ambition and articulate, a new paradigm forward. And it's those ideas, those paradigms that are going to generate transformative philanthropic energy for us, right? So I think we just need to go for it right now.
Well said. That is exciting and notable too. Just lifting up your comment about the concept of transformative philanthropy being built on a vision and being relative to donors in terms of what a transformative gift means for individuals. So I'd love to open up for a few questions that we've received throughout the conversation today. And there's a question about sort of competition or cooperation. And this particular question is about community foundations, but I would love to open up this concept, not just to be about community foundations, but about cooperation or partnership in the philanthropic and nonprofit space generally, how you've experienced it, and what tips you might have for others. Ruth, Connie, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because if we have a successful nonprofit, meaning it's achieving its intended impact, don't we have an obligation to bring more people in, right? So I think it's different than business in that if you have a winning formula, we should be comfortable and confident to share that with others in our space. I do find in the healthcare space, people are very willing to share great ideas to help advance all of us, right? All boats rise. That's the concept.
I just wanted to also additionally share, at MIS, we think about this a lot because of the fact of being a national organization. So MIS is the oldest national women's fund, but in our existence, during the time of our existence since 1973, we've seen well over 100, 150 women's funds start up around the world. And so most states have a women's fund, et cetera. And so it's really, really important to us to be thinking about where do we lead? Where are we supporting? What's an appropriate stance for us to have? And how do we make sure that we're always living by our value to follow leaders, to support collective power building? It's right in our mission statement, but doing it can be tricky when you're seen as kind of carpetbagging into a state that already has a really active women's fund and then set of grassroots partners working on the same issues. And so how do you make sure that you're leveraging what we think about at MIS and what we talk about a lot is how do we make sure that we're leveraging our influence in the spaces that we're in and at the tiers that we're able to, in the tiers that we're able to be maneuvering so that influence is actually growing power across the nation, vertically from grass tops to grassroots. And it's all, honestly, it requires a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of humility, a lot of listening, and being willing to hear when you've maybe done something that wasn't seen quite as collaborative as it could be. And so that you learn how to do it better the next time.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'll just quickly add a great question. And I think a little bit of it starts with this notion of, a bold vision, right, and bold solutions. And to a certain degree, as we try to embrace a new time coming out of the pandemic, it's hard to say that any bold solution can be accomplished by one organization, right? So part of, I think, the way that organizations need to sort of navigate this issue is really with a solution first mentality and really thinking through, okay, can we really change the way that this happens in the world by ourselves, right? And to sort of have that perspective and point of view is probably a little bit off base, frankly. And so I think as we think about collaboration, right, it really is solution oriented, and hopefully, you can have a leadership point of view, a leadership voice in the way that solutions are put forward, but collaboration is going to be the way forward. Public-private solutions, private-private partnerships, right? More and more different types of organizations coming together to advance equity and to create these new paradigms, right? So I think getting back to nimbleness and rethinking the way that we operate, certainly it's a challenge for every organization, but I think we are all going to have to become better collaborators and really lead on that front if we want to pursue these bold, visions that we have for our future.
Absolutely. Thank you all for answering that question. I wish we had more time. We could talk for at least another hour. As we wrap, we'll be sharing and popping up on the slide some additional resources, but I would love, as we're doing this, to plant a seed, Ruth, Steve, Connie, for one thing you would share with the audience. We'll come back around to you as we wrap up. And as you're thinking about that, for those of you who are interested in diving more deeply into the data, you can use this QR code to download today's presentation. and also to access other resources like our newly released edition of the Philanthropic Landscape, looking at both Giving USA data and other data insights. So hopefully this will provide an opportunity for some additional resources moving ahead. All right, so we'll go around with just a sentence or two each. One thought you'd like to leave with our audience today. Steve, we'll start with you.
I'll be brief and sort of reflect on what I've said. I think we have an incredible opportunity in front of us to shape solutions forward in new ways. And now is the time for us to really, like I said, go for it.
I'll echo that and just say, don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be afraid to learn something new. It's wonderful to be in a time where innovation is just happening everywhere, and you can really experiment.
I would agree. We are in a moment, so take advantage of it. And remember that a transformational gift may be transformational to that donor. So think about transformation from the donor perspective as well.
Steve, Ruth, Connie, thank you so much for today's conversation, for lending your insights, and for sharing your stories. We are so grateful for your participation and your work today. And for all of you who are on the line, thank you for the tireless work you do every day to make your communities a better place. And we certainly hope to stay in touch and continue the dialogue as we navigate the year ahead. In the meantime, we wish everyone well, be safe, and we will see you again on another conversation very soon. Thanks again, all.